Hello everyone and welcome back to the Beer Junkies. Today we are going to be brewing a double IPA. The double IPA is an intensely hoppy beer. It has a very clean bitterness, an intense hop aroma, but that hop bitterness is not harsh. It is a surprisingly drinkable and refreshing beer for it to have in the 60 to 80 IBU range. Now the malt in this beer is not big, rich, or malty. There can be undertones of toastiness or honey, but you absolutely don't want that to be the predominant flavor. The hops need to shine through in this style. And that is usually done by a 60-minute addition, a 30-minute addition, a flame out addition, and then at least one dry hop addition. So we are going to walk you through the whole thing. If you stick with us through this whole video, we will show you our malt profile, our water profile, the hops we use when we add them, the yeast that we use. We'll also walk you through our mashing setup, mash out, our sparging, the boil, whirlpool, fermentation, and then if you stay with us to the very end, I'll walk you through our tasting. So stick with us and enjoy. As always, we are starting with our water. The water profile for the double IPA is 50 parts per million of calcium, 15 parts per million of sodium, 110 parts per million of sulfate, and 50 parts per million of chloride. You're going to want that higher sulfate level to help accentuate that hop flavor and hop bitterness. So I've got all my salts here. To do this, I'm adding gypsum, calcium chloride, and Epsom salt. I'm going to add these into both the mash and the sparge. So once I get this hot liquor tank full into the temperature that I want, I'm going to transfer it into the mash tun, mix in these salts to get that water profile where I want, check the pH to make sure it's where I want, and then we're going to mash in. So I'll be back when it's time to mash in. Before we mash in, I want to go through our grains a little bit. So we've got ours all milled already. We have our rice hulls on top, and if we dig down below, you can see that we have got plenty of that crushed grist. For the grain bill, it is almost primarily pale malt, two-row pale malt, whatever you can get your hands on, to give you all those fermentable sugars. You don't really need much else. We use a little bit of wheat to help with the head retention. But beyond that, you can use a little bit of caramel crystal, but I'd be very careful with that because there is not supposed to be hardly, if any, residual sweetness or body left over. The malt character is very much in the background for this style of beer. It is going to be dominated by hops. So make sure you add plenty of fermentable sugars, but not too much else. We just mashed in, so now we are mashing at 152 to 53 degrees for 60 minutes. We've got the hot liquor tank set about 10 degrees higher than what we want the mash to be at so that it can stay heated throughout the mash. So after 60 minutes, we are going to mash out and then we're going to begin the sparge. But we actually add first wort hops to the American Double IPA. So in the meantime, during this mash, we are going to measure out our hops. For our American IPA, we use both Mount Hood hops and Columbus hops. And we use them from Yakima Valley. These are our Mount Hood, and these are our Columbus. The Mount Hood hops are very similar to a German noble hop, and they're mostly an aroma hop, but they do add a very nice clean bitterness with hints of spice and floral notes. So we will add this a couple of times as first wort hops and flavor hops and aroma hops. The Columbus hops are also similar. They add a nice clean bitterness, but they also add a touch of citrus. So we will add the Columbus hops in as a dry hop. So now that you know what hops we use, now I'm going to show you when we add them in. The very first one that we do is a first wort hop addition. So all this means is that right when sparge begins and the boil kettle starts to fill up, we add these hops in. And there's varying opinions on whether or not first wort hops are any different than 60 minutes. But we do it anyways for this beer just because we think it's fun. The 60-minute hops are next. That's just for the clean bitterness. Then we have the 30-minute hops, and that's for a little bit of flavor. And this will be Mount Hood, so it is a little bit of floral and spicy flavor and aroma. And then very last but not least is the 0-minute hops. That's strictly for aroma. It's also Mount Hood, and that'll finish us off with that citrus, or not citrus, the floral and spicy aroma. So this is our mashing and mash out setup. So we will pull the wort from the bottom of the mash tun, push it through our wort pump, which is going through our Herms coil. The Herms coil is inside the hot liquor tank, which is how we keep the mash heated. It is then coming through this tube and recirculating through our ring. It's not quite long enough for this beer. For the sparge, the only difference that we're going to do is we are going to start pulling water from our hot liquor tank and pushing it through this input. So we will switch the lever on the three-way pump over there to the boil kettle while this fills up with water, and I'll be back to show you that when we're actually doing it. But this will help us rinse those grains and keep the level of liquid above the bed that we want. Well, we just reached the 60-minute timer, so now I'm heating up the hot liquor tank for mash out. So I've got this heating up to about 176 degrees, and then that will heat this mash tun up to 168-ish degrees. And that'll probably take about 15 to 20 minutes as that works its way through the Herms coil. But once we get to mash out, we will begin to sparge. First wort hops. Well, we just got to mash out, so now we are going to the sparge. We are pulling the wort from the bottom of the mash tun. I switched that valve on the three-way pump. We're pushing it into the boil kettle. At the same time, we are pulling the water from our hot liquor tank through our water pump, and then up here to the sparge ring as we are rinsing the residual sugars that are left in all those grains. So we already added the first wort hops right when the sparge began, but I'll be back when it's time to add the 60-minute hops. So we just got to boiling. We are going to boil this wort for 90 minutes. We'll add the hops in at 60 minutes, 30 minutes, and then right at flame out to get all aspects of the hop character, the bitterness, the flavor, and the aroma. We'll be back at each hop addition and then for the whirlpool. 60-minute hops. 30 minutes. And flame out hops. And this is our whirlpool setup. We are pulling the wort from the bottom of the boil kettle. We are pushing it through our pump into the tangential input so it will create that vortex in the middle, especially with this beer to pull all of those hops to the center so we don't push them into the fermenter during knockout. This is how we go through knockout. We are pulling the wort from the bottom of the boil kettle through the racking arm so we can pull the wort above all of that hop and protein mix in the center of the boil kettle. We are shooting it through our pump into our heat exchanger. We've got the oxygen in there. You can see that bubbling away, going in right around 60 degrees, all the way down here to see our fermenter bubbling away as we push out all the excess air. We just finished knockout, so we took our specific gravity reading. It was right where we were hoping, but you can see if we zoom in a little bit, all that cold break settling to the bottom, which is why you definitely need a effective heat exchange to drop that temperature from almost boiling to pitching temperature as rapidly as possible. If you don't do that, all of this stuff that is precipitating out will be left in the beer and will cause what is known as chill haze. This is our yeast. We use the California Ale WLP001 from White Labs. For the Double IPA, you want a clean, highly attenuating yeast. You don't want one to leave too much residual sweetness. This one's going to ferment all the way out and really accentuate those hop flavors. So you can use this or any other yeast strain that fits those descriptors. We ferment this at 67 degrees until it is done. About 4 to 5 days before we transfer it into the bright tank, we will dry hop it with those Columbus hops to really get those fresh, citrusy, herbal, and floral notes. But after those hops are added, we will cold crash it at 33 degrees, transfer it to the bright tank, carbonate it up to about 2.7 volumes, and then we'll keg it, and then these are best enjoyed fresh. So as soon as it is kegged, it'll be ready to drink. So this is what we made. It is a light, crystal clear beer with a white head. For the aroma, I get the herbal and the floral notes from the Mount Hood, and I get just a touch of the citrus from the Columbus. For the taste, there is a noticeable bitterness on the very back of my tongue. I'm not really getting any of the malt flavor, but the The hop flavor, the bitterness is most prominent. There's a very slight citrus, but there's not much. It's very dominated by the bitterness. But I wouldn't say that the bitterness is so much so that I wouldn't want to drink a decent amount of it. It is surprisingly refreshing. Yeah, for about 70 IBUs, this isn't bad. We're over the age of 21. We do not condone underage drinking. Please drink responsibly. If you'd like to see more content like this, make sure you click the subscribe button below. And if you would like exclusive brewing content, make sure you sign up for our newsletter at the link in the description, thebeerjunkies.com. Cheers.